Welcome everyone to this channel where I will be sharing episode reviews of that 1960s television show that I enjoy so much, Lost in Space. I encourage you to like and subscribe so that you don't miss each new installment as I work my way through all 83 episodes of this wonderful series. Up next, Season 1, Episode 19, Ghost in Space. An explosive charge in a chemically unstable bog releases a creature that feeds on power and threatens the safety of our space colonists. Smith mistakenly believes this being to be a spirit of one of his ancestors. He first seeks to communicate with the spirit through a seance and later attempts to placate him. Ghost in Space is an episode about which there are very varying opinions. Some dislike it because it marks a change in the series as Smith becomes ever more comedic. While I certainly don't consider it to be a top-tier episode, I do fall into the camp that enjoys Ghost in Space as it is long on atmosphere, there is some good adventure, and at least for my tastes, Smith's comedy works. So with that, let's jump into our story. John, Don, Smith, and Will are on an expedition to drill for deuteronium. They're drilling near a bog that emanates a lethal gas. John posts a sign to warn others about this dangerous gas, but while sinking the signpost into the ground, some of that gas emerges and he succumbs to the fumes. Don wonders why John has been gone so long, and Will goes to check on him. To his horror, he sees his dad lying unconscious on the ground. He calls for Don, who drags John away from the fumes. After a few moments, John comes to and utters the somewhat obvious comment,
It looks like I forgot to read that sign. Thanks.
While John and Don are setting up the drill rig, Smith somewhat characteristically is being critical of the entire mission. John hands him some explosives intended for a nearby drill site. He instructs Smith to pull the pin, drop it in the hole, and get away before the blast. Will volunteers to join him on the journey. Along the way, he says he knows a shortcut to the drill site right through the bog. Will insists that it's safe, but Smith is resistant given what just happened to John. The alternative, however, means a much longer and harder route. In characteristic fashion, to avoid either journey, Smith intends to ditch the explosives. He first comes up with a false story to send Will back to the chariot. Now alone, Smith approaches the edge of the bog where the gas is still very evident. He pulls the pin and tosses the explosives into the bog. It instantly is swallowed up by the soil of the bog. Somewhat comedically, Smith then nervously throws the pin into the bog as well before moving away to safety. The explosives detonate, and immediately, Don recognizes that the explosion did not sound quite right. John says they'll check on it tomorrow, but it's getting late and he wants to get back to the Jupiter. Come nightfall at the bog, however, we see some invisible force, first uprooting trees and then leaving behind some very large and deep footprints. Back at the ship, we have a bit of a domestic scene going on as Maureen outfits everyone with brand new fatigues. This scene is fun for a couple of reasons. First, I always enjoy seeing a 1960s view of what the future might look like. Typically, how housework, ranging from washing dishes to making clothes to cooking potato chips, will all be done with the push of a button on some little machine with a bunch of lights. The real fun, though, comes from Smith. First, I love his boastful comments about how to cut a cloth for his physique.
Look at it. You've made no allowance for the breadth of my shoulders or the muscular development of my arms. Let me give you a hint, madam. Think of the Greek athlete, the discobolos thrower, for example, and you'll be much closer to fitting me properly. Now then, I must have some scarlet paint. You know where I can find some?
No? Oh, you mean for...
Especially, though, I just laugh at how he dismissively declares the women's efforts as
incredible.
Amidst all of this, Smith is looking for some scarlet red paint so that he might create a Ouija board. This arouses Penny's curiosity, who wants to know more about what a Ouija board does. Smith describes that he intends to use the device to communicate with his dear departed great-uncle Thaddeus. About this time, John, Don, and Will step out of the ship and overhear the discussion. Will quickly jumps in saying that the whole thing is silly, that these spirits do not actually exist. Don tells Smith that if he can actually raise a spirit, he should prove it. But Smith once again asserts that he needs red paint to do so. Don says there's some red lead inside the ship, and Smith decides that that will have to do. This raises Penny's curiosity even further, and with the red paint now in hand, Smith sets to work on creating his Ouija board. Everyone, now gathered around the table, expresses their own skepticism. Undeterred, Smith asks for a volunteer to join him. Don raises his hand, and amusingly, Smith quickly says,
"This is my Aunt Matilda." No.
He does, however, believe Penny will be the perfect volunteer. With her parents' blessing, of course. With that, Smith and Penny set themselves up with the Ouija board just a short distance away from the table. However, they find themselves still subject to more skepticism from the family. Once more, I can't help but smile at some of the back and forth between Smith and the family. Will says that it's just so silly, and I find it very natural that we see Maureen's hand reach in and tap on his shoulder so as to say, "That'll be enough of that," in a very motherly sort of way. More so, there's always some smiles to be had whenever Smith and Don begin poking at one another.
We must remove ourselves from all adverse influences.
Give my regards to Aunt Matilda.
Philistine.
So as to separate themselves from negative thoughts, Smith and Penny move further away and once more set up to contact Uncle Thaddeus. Indeed, after a bit of time, things begin to happen. The wind begins to blow, and we start to see things moving about. Smith is excited about what he believes is the presence of his Uncle Thaddeus, but Penny clearly is growing a bit more fearful. Then, things become much more dramatic. Out of fear, Penny and Smith run back to the family. Barely able to catch her breath, Penny describes what happened, and immediately Don and John assume that Smith must have been playing some sort of trick on her. Smith defends himself and asserts that his uncle was a powerful man with a bit of a mean streak.
Are you sure, Uncle
As Smith
Thaddeus
describes
did
it,
that?
Indeed, yes, he was a very powerful man in life, always throwing things about when something didn't please him. Oh, nice as pie on the surface, but very pugnacious underneath, an iron hand in a velvet glove. Tonight, he was all iron hand. I wish I knew how to placate him.
remaining skeptical of Smith and his story, the family turns in for the night. Later in the evening, though, that force that Smith believes to be his Uncle Thaddeus arrives at the Jupiter. Much like as he did during Mr. Nobody, the robot describes the force as something that is incomprehensible.
Invisible, indestructible, irresistible.
You can do better than that, you ninny.
Negative. Computers inadequate for further information.
Well, that's clear enough.
Before long, the power of that invisible force becomes evident, as the outside campsite is essentially destroyed with everything being thrown about. It's funny that the network executives were always on alert for any monster that they found too scary for the show's young audience. Yet, I remember watching this scene as a young boy back in the 60s and being quite alarmed by the violence of it, as tables and such are thrown against the Jupiter's viewport. Smith, absolutely convinced that this force is his uncle, goes out and attempts to communicate with it. After a few moments, however, an immense boulder comes flying straight for Smith and he drops down out of the way. John, Don, and Maureen come out to help Smith back to his feet and survey the damage. Don ponders the power of that force to be able to throw such large boulders around. Pointing towards the rising sun, John hypothesizes that whatever this force is, it prefers to work in darkness. Smith steadfastly insists that what they just witnessed was the spirit of his Uncle Thaddeus, but Don discovers footprints like those that were made in the bog. Don suggests that they go up to the drill site to see what they can learn there, and this elicits a bit of a confession from Smith.
You put the blasting pack in the hole marked with the arrow.
Oh, indeed I did.
Uh-huh. And you put the metal capping back on the hole before you left.
Naturally, that's SOP for all blasting operations.
There is no arrow. And no metal capping. Now, what did you do with the explosives? I want the truth.
You're hurting me! All right then, Smith, what did you do with it?
Smith's confession leads John to piece together the puzzle. The explosion coupled with the chemistry of the bog has somehow produced this force. He and Don determine to go to the drill site and see what they can learn. There, they see more of these three-toed footprints, and John ponders some interesting questions.
Look at this. Now, what kind of force could remain invisible and yet have enough molecular weight to leave tracks like this?
And only comes out at night. Like Smith's Uncle Thaddeus.
Back at the Jupiter, Smith is planning to lead the rest of the family in a seance to placate what he still believes to be the angry spirit of his Uncle Thaddeus. The family remains skeptical, but Maureen permits Judy, Penny, and Will to join Smith in his seance. Meanwhile, out in the bog, John and Don can hear the heavy thumping of those footsteps. Off in the distance, they see trees and such being ripped out of the ground by an invisible force. John raises his laser rifle, but doesn't know at what to aim. Suddenly, the invisible beast begins pounding on the two of them, and John and Don get knocked around. Not knowing where to attack or how to defend, they eventually hightail it out of there and head back to the ship with this destructive force following close behind. By the time John and Don arrive back at the Jupiter, Smith's seance is in full swing. John hurries Maureen and the children into the ship. Don raises his laser rifle, but Smith knocks it away, still quite convinced that what he would be aiming at is his Uncle Thaddeus. As Don comes to be assaulted by the invisible beast, Smith quickly decides to join the others in the safety of the ship. Inside, they can hear the creature pounding on the hull of the Jupiter, and Don turns on the force field. After a few moments, the ship goes dark. Whatever this force is, it seems to feed on power. After a time, the thumping stops, and John once more points to the rising sun as the explanation. As Don turns on the backup systems, John wonders if this creature feeds on power, can they maybe use power as bait to trap it? Taking advantage of what quite clearly is the cage left behind by the keeper, John and Don string up some electronic equipment inside. They test it with a poke, and indeed, the door slides down. The disagreement over what they're dealing with continues between Don and Smith, Don reiterating that this is a primitive force while Smith insisting that a spirit cannot be caught in a cage. Smith fears that once the spirits witness this affront, there will be no stopping them, that the only solution is to placate them, to let them know that they all believe. Understandably, the scientifically minded John responds,
Well, somehow I just can't see myself sitting down at a Ouija board. And since I'm in command here, we're gonna go after whatever's giving us all this trouble my way.
At your own peril.
That evening, with the bait set, we see the electronic device in the cage jiggle about, and the cage door closes. Whatever is inside starts pounding on the cage as it shakes violently. The robot calls out an alarm, and everyone, still clad in pajamas and robes, comes up for a look. There are a lot of guesses as to what it is that they've just caught, but in the end, John says they will wait until morning to see what they have trapped. Later that evening, though, Smith comes to Will's cabin to wake him. Smith is dressed in a monk's robe, and he has in his arms a few items. He wants to make his way through the bog to placate the spirits and needs Will to show him the safe passage. Will remains skeptical. He then says that his mom did encourage him having an open mind, so with that, Will agrees to go along. We next see the two of them navigating their way through the bog in the darkness. Meanwhile, back at the Jupiter, with the robot standing guard next to the cage, the creature is able to topple it and escape. It robs the robot of his power, and he then thumps off into the darkness as well. Will believes they've made it to the middle of the bog, which may be the best place to do the placating. Smith steps up onto a large rock and begins speaking to the spirits. Just then, we get our first very quick glance at the now perfectly visible creature, and quite a creature he is. Smith continues to reach out to the spirits and thinks he hears something, but Will says he neither hears nor sees anything. Smith wants to try a different spot, and they wander through the bog a bit more. After traveling further, Smith and Will think they may have just come face to face with the spirit. They duck down behind a rock, and Smith lays out various items that he brought along. Here, we have a tired old joke, but there's just something about the chemistry between Smith and Will and how these lines are delivered that makes it fun just the same.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to exercise them.
Why would a spirit need exercise?
No, my boy. Exorcise, it means to cast out evil. The evil demons.
How do we do?
As they attempt to exorcise those demons, the charm of that chemistry between Smith and Will continues to play out for us.
Oh, ye herb of evil odor.
Oh, ye herb of evil odor.
Unite with the demons who possess this spirit and render them harmless.
Unite with the demons who possess this spirit and...
Well, go on.
I don't think that's a spirit at all.
What?
I think it's a dead tree.
Don't get too close.
Will goes out ahead to search for the dagger when he loses his footing and falls into the bog. Smith, following behind, is unaware of what has happened to Will when he stumbles himself, just as the creature comes upon him. Smith lets out one of his characteristic screams and jumps to his feet. Just as the creature closes in, it instantly disappears. Smith runs back for his items, and while searching around, he discovers one of Will's boots lying on the ground and now assumes the worst. Smith begins his journey back to the ship just as we hear Will's voice calling out for him. He has become invisible, and we now see his footprints in the soil, one boot and the other a bare foot. Will realizes that he can't see himself, just as he once more hears the thumping footprints of the bog creature approaching. Meanwhile, back at the Jupiter, Judy looks out the viewport and is the first to discover that the creature has escaped and calls everyone to the upper deck. Maureen tells Judy to gather Will and Smith. She calls down, but of course neither of them respond. John, Don, and Maureen look over the remains of the cage as Judy tells them that neither Smith or Will are on the ship. It's at this moment that Smith arrives back at the Jupiter.
Where is he? The bog. The bog.
We'll find him, darling.
John and Don are searching the bog area for Will. Don thinks he sees something, and we hear Will's voice calling out for help. We now see the bog creature thrashing about, seemingly struggling to grab Will. Just then, the creature pauses to look up and sees the sun rising. He waves his arms for a few moments before turning invisible again. In that moment, Will himself once more becomes visible. Just then, John and Don find him, and Will then struggles somewhat to describe what it is he's just been through.
But I became invisible.
I believe you, son.
Well, and then something tried to... Well, I don't know, but it couldn't have been Dr. Smith's Uncle Thaddeus.
Well, knowing Dr. Smith, there isn't anything I'd put past his Uncle Thaddeus.
The next scene sets up our next episode. Once again, I will withhold my comments until my review of that episode, War of the Robots. So with that, let me share a few more thoughts about Ghost in Space. I'll start with the minuses or negatives. That list is actually quite long, as there are very many things that simply don't make sense. Some of them are very small, such as when the creature sucks all of the energy out of the Jupiter 2, the robot also loses power. Then, when Don turns on the auxiliary power, why would the robot also power back up? Things like this are small, but they just don't make sense and do always catch my attention, pulling me a bit out of the story. Likewise, timing doesn't always make sense. When Smith holds his seance with the family, he says they have to hurry because it's nearly midnight. This seance, however, is interrupted after only a few moments by the invisible creature terrorizing the camp, and yet that short scene concludes with the rising sun. There's also the scene with Don and John fighting the invisible creature. I know it's difficult to stage a fight like this, but inevitably, Don and John's reactions to being hit just aren't believable. I think John especially so. More importantly, the hitting sounds aren't quite right. A monster like this might take a swipe with its open claws or attack with its teeth. But was this monster actually fist fighting? Because that's the sound we hear. It almost seems like Batman-styled BAM and POW cards should have been inserted during this fight. Then there's the robot playing the guitar during the seance. As was the case in Welcome Stranger, this robot guitar playing moment was as ridiculous as it was unnecessary. And again, like Welcome Stranger, why does this clearly acoustic guitar sound like an electric? I'm guessing, though, that for the robot singing coming through the rye, we are almost certainly hearing Bob May's voice instead of Dick Tufeld's, which is kind of cool. Then there's the climax, which simply seems a bit off. I find it incredible that Will should not have been more astonished that he's invisible. It also doesn't make sense that Will is invisible while we can see the creature, but then becomes visible just as the creature disappears. It seems backwards somehow. Most notably, Will's attempt to explain what has happened to John just doesn't seem right. He was invisible and threatened by this terrible bog creature. The monster disappears, Will becomes visible again, and then when explaining it to his father, he seems kind of dismissive of these fantastic events as if it was all just a big nothing. There should have been much more awe over what he just went through, as well as more relief at having been found safe by John and Don. Finally, there's the seance scene with Penny. Given the primitive nature and violence of this creature, some of this scene just doesn't make sense either. We know the creature is there as we see plants being uprooted and tossed aside. We will later see the destruction it causes at the Jupiter campsite. But what about those things in the middle? Would this violent creature break a glass or lift a Ouija board and spin it around off into the air while leaving Smith and Penny completely unmolested? Again, it just doesn't make sense if you pause to think about it. That said, this is a very cool, spooky, and fun scene, so as is so often the case with Lost in Space, best to not think about it and simply enjoy the ride for what it is. While this can seem like a long list of negatives, and it is, that doesn't mean this is a terrible episode. Actually, far from it, because happily, the list of positives is equally as long. First, there is a believable sci-fi element in the nature of this creature, that a discharge of energy in some chemically unstable bog, while admittedly being a bit far-fetched, is not that far outside the realm of believable science fiction. There are also very many really interesting and dramatic special effects scattered about this episode. The creature's footprints in the ground are especially cool. I'm not even sure how they made them, other than maybe a footprint-shaped cutout dropping down below a bed of sand, but even that would have required a lot of special attention to get it to work as well as it did. There are other dramatic effects like John's danger sign flying up and breaking apart in midair. Even more astonishing is the breaking of the glass on the Ouija board. Once more, I'm not even sure how they did that. I'm guessing maybe a BB was shot at a candy glass while stunt actors held their fingers on it, but I really don't know. Though not necessarily a special effect, It's also worth noting that the creature, once visible, is pretty cool. More scary and believable than many other creatures the Robinsons will come to encounter over 3 seasons. Though not meaningful in any way, I always enjoy noting recycling of props as it happens. If you look at the legs of the table at which Smith is holding his seance, those legs are the antenna from the Jupiter that John repairs during the derelict episode. Finally, there's Smith and all the fun and humor he brings. I love the scene when he arrives back at the camp as the women work on new fatigues for everyone. There's his somewhat classic boasting about how to cut a cloth for his physique. What I especially love, though, is his contemptuousness as he tosses aside his own fatigues. Most notably, this episode marks a meaningful step forward in the evolution of the Smith character, with nearly all of his scenes played for comedy. We also see a bit more of the bonding between Smith and Will, which of course will become foundational for the series over time. That bonding results in something we see only rarely throughout the series, a remorseful Smith, as near the end he asks himself,
"What will I do now? How will I tell them? Oh, Will. Oh, dear."
Jonathan did a wonderful job with these scenes, and moments like this allow this devious character to remain likable. How can we not smile when Will returns and Smith leans in to tell him that he knows exactly where to find his boot?
Oh, Will. Oh, Will, it's you.
I found the lantern, but I lost a shoe looking for it.
Lost your shoe? I know exactly where to find it. Come along.
Somewhat famously, Jonathan did a tremendous amount of rewriting of his, and as a consequence often, Will's lines as well. I often wonder for what scenes this was done and when did it start taking place. I'm sure at first he was a hired actor and largely performed the lines as written, but when did he start exerting the control that comes with emerging as the series' star? That's hard to tell, but I definitely get the feeling that Jonathan was feeling his oats by now, and many of his scenes and lines were almost certainly authored by himself personally. Also across the series, we will see Jonathan wear all sorts of nonsensical outfits. Even across the more serious Season 1, we will soon see him wearing a doughboy helmet, an artist's smock and beret, the sweats of a trainer, and the shawl of an old man. These things leave us to ponder, how did that come to be aboard the Jupiter 2? Now, by the time we get to Season 2 and 3, we'll see badminton rackets, bowling balls, cash registers, and more. Yet here, during Ghost in Space, we have our first instance of that, as Smith dons a monk's robe. This is, of course, in the name of comedy, and once again for me, it's comedy that works. So with that, I'll leave it to Dr. Smith to offer the final word.
Yes, I know, Major. It's mass and energy and similar figments of your nuclear imagination. And if you choose to believe that humbug, you go right ahead and do it. Oh, the ignorance of science!
Though there are a great many gaps in logic, this episode offers up quite a bit of fun. It's one of the more creepy or scary episodes of the series. The creature is pretty cool. There's quite a bit of drama and action, and a fair amount of smiles scattered about. No doubt about it, Ghost in Space is not a favorite, but I'm always still happy to see it come up as I work my way through the series. I grade it as a B+. That has it tied with the Oasis for my lowest grading of the series to this point, though again, this is still a pretty solid grade. That's reflected in my ranking, 26th for the season and 46th for the series. While that's near the bottom for Season 1, it is not far off the midpoint across the entire series, and that sounds just about right. If you would like to see the full Lost in Space series, it presently airs for free on METV. You can also still pick up Lost in Space on DVD. Walmart currently sells a box set that includes some wonderful extras, and it's available at a very modest cost. Better still, pick up Lost in Space on Blu-ray. That set also features a number of wonderful extras, including commentary by the cast. Like I said, I'm a fan, and for me, the Blu-ray is a must-have. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Ghost in Space. One of the things I enjoy most about sharing reviews like this is how different fans perceive each episode quite differently, and I invite you to leave your own perspectives below in the comments. Most of all, I hope you will come back and join me when I review our next episode, War of the Robots, a very cool episode featuring Robbie the Robot. Once again, I recommend subscribing so that you don't miss each new installment. Thanks for watching.